I now have the pleasure to introduce Graeme Stone, a class of 2011 Lambda Fellow in Genre Fiction.
I will be reading from my novel in progress, The Party Boys, Mystery of the Black Book. Little setup, Frank and Joe are two boys on the run for a murder they did not commit, and unfortunately 16-year-old Frank has been kidnapped by an ex-gay ministry in Orange County.
Welcome to the Holy Purity chapter of the ex-gay ministries,
said the sugar-voiced Mr. Hammond. He handed Frank a bright red rubber bracelet. Frank gulped. It was stamped with the initials WWJD. One time he had mistakenly walked into a Christian music store at the mall. Not only were there posters and postcards and t-shirts and bearing the slogan, but just about every squeaky clean kid in the place was wearing one of these WWJD bracelets. Frank wanted to yell, "What would Jesus do? He'd run the hell away from you judgmental fucks." Mr. Hammond snapped the bracelet with an audible pop on Frank's wrist. "Hey," barked Frank, "that hurt."
Francis,
chided Mr. Hammond, using Frank's new straight name. "That didn't really hurt. It's your brotherhood bracelet. When you want to stray, it keeps you strong. Have an impure thought? Just give it a manly snap." Frank leveled his eyes at Mr. Hammond. Would that thought include homicide? Mr. Hammond shook his head.
"You will please take your seat next to Peter. I'd like to get started."
Sure, Mr. Hammond might have his boot on Frank's neck right now, but Frank noticed as the teacher leaned over for chalk that he had the beginnings of a muffin top. Frank knew that a man with one vice often had others. Excellent, he thought. Frank sat down and winked at the strawberry blonde Peter. The boy's open notebook had the name Tad Beaumont written in the corner of a page, and Frank thought he would faint. Not only had they rechristened this boy Peter, which was pretty gay already, but Tad had to be the gayest name in the world next to Francis. They were meant for each other. Tad held Frank's gaze for a second and then faced the front. Satisfied that Mr. Hammond was ensconced in his lecture, Tad looked Frank right in the eye and then popped his brotherhood bracelet. He bit his lip at the agony of ecstasy, and Frank almost popped a boner.
"Ahem, gentlemen," said Mr. Hammond. "Perhaps the brotherhood bracelet would be a good place to start today's lesson. What would Jesus not do? As clearly stated in Leviticus 18:22, thou shalt not lie with mankind, as with womankind. It is abomination."
The room was suddenly a flurry of obedient hands slipping through Bibles, fingers pushing squeaky highlighters across pages. Frank wanted to take his shoe off and sling it at the board. Christ, he thought, what a bunch of lemmings. "Excuse me." Frank put on his best curious student face.
Mr.
Hammond, I noticed that this is the King James translation."
"Yes, this is the text we use here at Holy Purity."
"Well, I'm sure you know from your ecumenical councils that the Bible went through quite an evolution to get to this form. In the interest of a complete education, why don't you tell us about the origin of the passage, from your study of the Latin and the Chaldean texts?" The room was quiet, 20 pairs of eyes shooting back and forth from Frank to Mr. Hammond. Frank didn't crack a smile, savoring the moment. He could be just as brainy as his brother Joe when he really wanted to be. But wasn't it more fun to surprise people than to have them expect you to be smart all the time?
"Why, Francis, you're not the fallen angel you appear to be."
Mr. Hammond was now suddenly creepily respectful. Even Tad took on a rosy glow. A desperate approval seeker, eager to learn how to hide being gay under a cover of spiritual smarts.
"Why don't you tell us how you came to know so much about the Bible?"
said Mr. Hammond. Frank took a deep breath and removed all sarcasm from his voice. He'd found over the years of visits to principals that he got the best expressions when he told them the truth. "Well, you're bound to swallow some knowledge if you suck off enough priests." The gasps were deafening, and still over them rose Mr. Hammond's voice.
"You! Office! Leave now!"
Getting hustled out of the room under Mr. Hammond's surprisingly strong pitching arm, Frank was lost in triumph and the snapping of brotherhood bracelets all over the room.